Hey, what's up guys? I'm Ryan from American Trucks, and today I'm here with the MotoFab 2-inch front leveling kit fitting your 2007 to 2018 Silverado 1500 and Sierra 1500, excluding the 2014 to 2018 Denali model. This is going to be for those of you that are looking to level out that truck for an incredibly affordable price. This is going to get rid of that factory rake, giving you a better stance, a little additional ground clearance, and allowing you to fit up to a 33-inch tire. Now, these are machined for a perfect fit. They're made of heavy-duty, durable billet aluminum, and they're finished off with a black powder coating that's going to blend right into that factory suspension. Installation is relatively simple as far as these leveling kits go. Since the spacer bolts right on top of that factory strut, we don't need to disassemble that assembly at all, making it pretty easy. Now, these are designed for long life with their solid one-piece construction, unlike those welded spacers that can tend to crack over time. Now, there's many options to choose from on the site, and I think this is one of the great ones to choose from. At just around $60, you really can't beat that price, and not only that, these come with a limited lifetime warranty, and they're made right here in the USA. As far as installation goes, I am going to give this a 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter since we are dealing with suspension and such, but expect to get this done in about 2 hours. Now, with that being said, let's hop into the install. Tools we use for this install: gloves, safety glasses, 18mm wrench, 15mm wrench, 1/4-inch drive ratchet, red Loctite, 5/16 Allen key, 10mm socket, 15mm socket, 17mm socket, 21mm socket, 22mm socket, a cutoff wheel, 1/2-inch drive impact, channel locks, hammer, pry bar, bungee cord, 3/8 drive impact. So one of the nice things about this kit is we don't have to touch the rear. This is only going to be a spacer for the front. It's going to lift and level that out. We have to get that strut out, so basically we need to take everything off around that. So there's 2 ways you can do it. You can do it on a lift like we're doing it, where you have to take the front wheels and tires off, or you can do it on the ground. If you're doing it on the ground, you want to lift the front of the truck up, supported with jack stands. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect our brake lines. There's going to be 2 brackets that we need to take the bolts out of. We're going to use a 10mm socket, and I'll show you how to do that right now. So the first bolt is going to be on top of here, right behind the brake rotor. After that, we're going to have another bolt back here on the upper control arm. It's going to free up the brake line and the ABS line, so when we drop this whole setup down, it's not going to rip. Now the next thing we're going to do is disconnect our sway bar end link. This is going to allow the lower control arm to drop down enough so we can get that strut out. So we're going to use a 15mm wrench for the top, 15mm socket for the bottom. And then we're going to pull that whole assembly out. So the next thing we're going to do is take out our tie rod. So we're going to use a 21mm socket, take that factory nut off, and then we'll smack it with a hammer and get it out of there. So to get this out, we're not going to smack the tie rod, we're going to smack the steering knuckle. That should allow that to pop out. We'll just set that aside. So after that, we're going to swing this to the side, and we're going to take this nut off of the upper control arm. We're going to use an 18mm wrench to take that off. So at this point in time, we are going to separate this upper ball joint. The way we're going to do that is smack the steering knuckle, and that's going to crack that free. You can put a little tension on that with a pry bar. Now there's a lot of swinging weight here, and if you choose to take this brake assembly off, that's going to lighten it up. We're not going to do that, so we're going to take a bungee cord and bungee that to the side once we break this free. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Next, we're going to go to the bottom of the strut. We're going to take these 2 bolts out. We use a 15mm socket to get those out. Now, after you get this last one out, this whole control arm is going to drop down, so you might want to support it with a jack stand or something. So after that, we're going to go up top because we need to take the 3 nuts off of the top of the strut. So you're going to have some wires up here. You can just use a screwdriver or a pry bar to pry those off, and then we're going to use an 18mm wrench to get those nuts off. So we're going to put a hand on the strut to get this last nut off. Once we get that off, we're going to pull this whole assembly out. So with our strut out, we're going to come over here on the table. Now we have a spacer to install, but before we get this spacer installed, we have a few things that we need to do. Now we're going to have these studs that we need to install into the spacer. We also need to cut a little bit of these studs off on the strut. This is so they don't poke out of the spacer. So the first thing we're going to do is install these studs into the spacer. Now it doesn't come with the kit, but it would be a good idea to get some red Loctite. That way that these things are going to be stuck in there and not have the chance to come out. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you are using red Loctite, we're going to put it down here at the base where it's actually going to seat in the spacer. We're going to put a little bit on there, let it run around the threads, and then we'll just get this started in there. We'll get all 3 of these done and thread it in, and then we'll get them in with the impact. So I'm installing these on this recessed area of this stud because we want this flat side facing up. So once we get those in, we're going to take a 5/16 Allen key and we're going to tighten those up. Now while that red Loctite is setting, we're going to cut these studs off. Now this spacer is only going to go on one way, so we got to find out which way that it's going to go on. So we need to cut this little bit of excess off that's sticking out so you can make a mark, pull the spacer off, and then we'll get them cut. Now to bolt this spacer on, we're going to use these brand new nuts that come in the kit. It would be a good idea to run these nuts down far enough, that way when you cut this, you can run them back off, and that'll re-thread them. So you want to put your gloves on, safety gloves and your safety glasses, and then we're going to cut down a little bit right where the threads start. So after you get those studs cut, we are ready to install this spacer. So we're going to fit this spacer back on, figuring out which way it goes. There we go. Then we're going to install the new nuts provided. So we're going to thread these on one by one. So after that, we're going to take our 17mm socket, go around and tighten these up. Now, there's not really any torque specs on these, so you just want to make them good and tight. All right, so one thing to mention is we have to spin this around 180 degrees to put it back in the truck. So it would be a good idea, and it's going to make it a lot easier for you to get this in if you put this end in a vise and just spin it a little bit because we want to cock this 180 degrees the other way. So after that, we're going to reinstall this and we're going to use those factory nuts for the top of these studs. So once we get that seated, push it up, get those nuts started. Now you want to leave this front one pretty loose. So we're just going to catch a few threads. We're going to get these 2 back ones on pretty much all the way. So on the bottom of the strut, you're going to have these little captured cage nuts. It would be a good idea to get these off because this is a little crooked when you get it on. It's going to be hard to get that bolt in the threads without cross-threading it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these bolts up through there first. So we're just going to run them up through the strut, just a little bit, and then I'm going to set one of these cage nuts on top. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So after that, we're going to go up top and we're going to tighten these nuts up using an 18mm wrench. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put that upper control arm back in. So you might need a hand. Like I said, there's a lot of weight out here. What we're gonna do is we're gonna use a pry bar. So we're gonna get this in place underneath of the control arm. Then we'll use a pry bar to pry the control arm down. That's gonna drop this stud down enough that we can get that factory nut back on. So after that, we're gonna drop our tie rod back in, put that factory nut back on, and then we're gonna tighten it up with a 21. Now, if it spins the stud, because there is a nylon lock on it, you can either hold this with the socket down here, or you can come in here, just pry down on it a little bit with a pry bar, and that should allow you to tighten that up. So when we put this back in, we want this bushing on this washer on the stud. This is gonna go up through the bottom. Then we have this collar to put in the middle. That's gonna go all the way up through there. And we're gonna lower this sway bar down. And we have another bushing that we need to put up top, and then the nut. So after that, we're gonna take our 15mm socket and wrench. We're gonna tighten this up. All right, so the last thing we need to do on this side is reinstall those brake line brackets. So we're just gonna put those factory bolts back in, tighten them up with a 10mm. All right, so now that you're all done, you can throw those wheels back on and torque them back down to factory specs. After that, you want to get an alignment, have them recheck all that suspension. However, that's going to wrap up my review and install. For more videos like this, check us out at AmericanTrucks.com.